war of values rages today throughout North America. Two sides with vastly differing, incompatible worldviews are locked in a bitter conflict that permeates every level of society. So says James Dobson and Gary Bauer in the book, Understanding the Times. Good evening and welcome, and on behalf of the Churches of Christ throughout West Georgia, we want to welcome you and thank you for your interest in this very timely subject, the truth about origins. I'm sure as I look around the audience tonight, most of us are greatly concerned about some of the troubling trends of our day. We are concerned about the breakup of our homes, the disintegration of our churches, our culture, our very way of life. I submit to you tonight that what we are in fact witnessing are the bitter fruits of atheism, a godless religion that is being unfortunately forced on our children and subsidized by our tax dollars. I further submit it is high time that we, people of faith, exercise our God-given right to freedom of expression and thought and inquiry, and in particular in our public schools, especially is this needed in the area of human origin. How we view ourselves has a tremendous bearing on how we behave and how we treat others. Who are we really? Are we the products of blind evolutionary forces, or did God make us according to His own image and likeness? These and related issues will be addressed by Dr. Harrub. Dr. Harrub comes to us as one who is eminently qualified to speak on these subjects. Having earned his BS degree in biology from Kentucky Wesleyan College, his doctorate degree in anatomy and neurobiology from the College of Medicine at the University of Tennessee in Memphis. He was listed in Who's Who among scientists and researchers. He is the author of Convicted, Heart of the Matter, Dissecting the Truth, and co-author of at least 5 other books. He has written many tracts and journal articles. He has presented this type of lecture in over 47 states and 5 different continents. He was an invited speaker to the International Conference on Creationism, and he has appeared on the television show Origins. He currently serves as the executive director and co-founder of Focus Press and as co-editor of Think magazine, a monthly magazine on Christian evidences. He also co-hosts the television show Think About It. Before I bring him to the stage tonight and present him to you, I would like to do a little housekeeping and again welcome you and thank you for your interest in being here tonight, and let you know that we will be having a question and answer session at the end of tonight's lecture and also at the end of tomorrow night's lecture. Also wanted to make you aware that the series continues through Monday night. Of course, tonight and tomorrow night we'll be here, and then Sunday morning at 9:30, the Bible study hour. He'll be speaking at the Bremen Church of Christ, and then of course at the 10:30 worship hour, and then Sunday evening again at 7:30, and then Monday at 7 p.m. he will continue this fine series. If you have any questions of a general nature about where to find the restroom, that sort of thing, please look for someone with a badge that says host. And no, I'm not the one with the most. I just have a badge, and I'm just learning my way around this beautiful facility. And we're so thankful that we have the opportunity to come here and present this series of lectures in this new state-of-the-art facility. There are also free DVDs in the foyer as you come in. They are designated that way, and Brother Harrub has one of his deputies on hand to make sure that you get only the ones that are free, but there are certainly good materials available to you, and we want you to avail yourself of those. Without any further delay, I want to, and I'm pleased in fact, to present to you Dr. Brad Harrub.
Spent 23 years in school, most of it studying science. And I can remember, even to this day, sitting in a classroom and listening to my professors trying to teach me, or better put, indoctrinate me, that evolution was true. tonight with a very simple subject. Now, I wanted you to consider water. We see it every day. We bathe in it, we drink it, we use it for all kinds of things. Have you ever asked yourself, where did water actually come from? You know, in all of my classes, we never address something so simple as water. Now, textbooks may put something in like this that tries to teach our kids. For instance, 3.9 billion years ago, the earth had cooled enough for water vapor to condense. The earth was, for the first time, experiencing violent rainstorms. Okay, let's stop right there, though, folks. That sounds really good on a page, but everybody in this room, when you were in junior high, you learned about something called the water cycle. And the water cycle takes water in order to make what? Water. Where did the water come from? And you say, oh, well, you know, maybe there are atoms out there, hydrogen, oxygen. Okay, that poses a really big problem, because if we've got free oxygen around, all the little experiments that I learned about in my biology class, where they tried to create life, they were dependent on the fact that there was no oxygen around, because that oxygen would actually oxidize the amino acids. In other words, it would kill anything that might lead to life. We got a problem. Evolution says we have these torrential rainstorms that came from nowhere. All right, even harder than that, let's think for just a moment. Where did the there come from? Where did the stuff come from? I was having a little sit-down coffee break with a gentleman. He was an atheist. He and I were studying together. And I told him, I said, I really want to understand your belief system. We were at a coffee shop. He said, well, all you got to do is picture in your mind nothing. I said, wait a second, what do you mean? He said, Brad, just clear your mind of everything. I said, okay. He said, that's what the universe came from. I said, well, okay, then help me understand what blew up. What was the big bang that went bang? And he said, well, the nothing exploded. I looked at him and I said, okay, wait a second. You're saying that there was nothing here, and then one day, for some reason, that nothing went boom, and we got all of this. He said, uh-huh. I said, buddy, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Because what you're saying takes a whole lot more faith. That you can take nothing, blow it up, and get all of this. And yet, quite literally, that's what they're trying to tell our kids today. Folks, this weekend, what we're going to look at is, we got two problems as I see it. Number one, we got only one theory of origins that's being taught. Folks, listen to me clearly. That's not education, that's indoctrination. When you stop allowing kids to critically examine and to think, then you are no longer teaching. What you're doing is you're brainwashing. That's one problem. Problem number two is, this isn't really good science. I hope we get to address both of those. Looking at ideas like, was Darwin right? Was he wrong? And yet, as we journey along this pathway this weekend, one of the things that I want you to kind of keep watching is the fact that everything is slanted towards this godless theory. I'll give you one example that is probably very common to everybody in the room. Several years ago, Cobb County wanted to put stickers in the front of their textbooks. Now, let me point out to you, this is the exact wording of those stickers. It says, this textbook contains material on evolution. Evolution is a theory, not a fact, regarding the origin of living things. This material should be approached with an open mind, studied carefully, and critically considered. Now, most of you know those stickers had to be removed. They were viewed to be unconstitutional. They had a quote-unquote religious bias. Well, first thing, I don't see a whole lot of religion in that. And second, folks, have we gotten to the point where we don't want our kids to think critically? That ought to scare you. If we are now in a government that basically says, no, we don't want our kids to study things with an open mind and critically consider what is before them. Because everybody in this room, whether we think about it or not, all of us are thinking about some of these major questions of life. Where did I come from? Why am I here? Where am I going when I die? The way in which we answer these questions has a lot to do with whether we believe there's a God. And folks, if you are removing that possibility from the classroom, if you are removing that possibility from the textbook, what are we doing to the way that our young people answer this question? Let me show you just how bad it is. Discover Magazine, 2006 issue. Cover story titled Unintelligent Design. Those of you who follow the creation evolution debate, you know that intelligent design has become kind of a taboo subject for those who believe in evolution. The reason being, anytime you have design, there must by default be a designer. You'll notice in this particular cover issue, they're asking the question, are viruses the mother of all life? And they're actually trying to basically state, yeah, human beings, we came from viruses. Take a look. The author said, now there's news for intelligent designers and the rest of us to ponder. We humans and all life on Earth may have well evolved from the most unintelligent entities one can imagine. Genetic shards that do nothing but copy themselves. We are nobody's great idea. We are the fortunate mistakes of countless biochemical morons. That's evolution. It is humbling, but somehow comforting. And folks, I don't know about you tonight, I don't find that very comforting. But the bottom line is, realistically, there are only two worldviews out there. Now, I know you may bring up other things. You may say, well, Brad, wait, what about Islam? Well, realistically, it boils down to this. Either there is a God, or there's not. Either we were created in the image and likeness of God, or we're the fortunate mistakes of countless biochemical morons. Now, as you look at that particular screen, ask yourself, what is the only legal theory of origins that we're teaching today? You don't even have to ask, because I can show you. You open up a textbook and we read, humans probably evolved from bacteria that lived more than 4 billion years ago. Or how about this one? We know, for example, that humans evolved from common ancestors we share with other living primates, such as chimpanzees and apes. Over and over and over again, our kids are being told, you came from some bacteria, from some sludge, from some amoeba. In fact, take a look at this one. This is a biology book put out by Harrub in camp. It says by the 7th month, the fetus looks from the outside like a tiny normal baby. But it's not. Now, folks, why would we teach our young people that a 7-month-old in the womb is not a human child? Furthermore, let me point out to everybody in this room what I consider to be the evil of marketing. Take a look at the picture that's associated with that statement. Any lady in this room, this auditorium, who has ever given birth, they'll tell you that's not a 7-month-old. Because by 7 months, they're doing aerobics in the womb. And yet, if they can get our kids to associate that picture with that statement, it makes it a whole lot easier to afford, doesn't it? Folks, what happens when you effectively remove God and you remove morals from a classroom? What happens when they are only allowed to look at one specific view of origins? Let's look at just one aspect. What about our sense of right and wrong? Where do we get our sense of right and wrong? If, for instance, I was in a university setting up in Wyoming not too long ago, I had a young man, he basically looked at me and said, you know, I don't really think there is a God. I said, well, do you believe in morals? He said, well, it's all opinion. I said, oh, really? I said, what about rape? Is that right or wrong? He paused. There was about 5 young ladies, college students, sitting in the same row as him, who all leaned forward. I wanted to know what this young man was going to say. He said, I prefer not to answer. I said, no, that's okay. We've got time. He said, well, I think it's just opinion. And all of a sudden, I thought I was going to have to hold back those young ladies. I said, are you trying to tell us that basically, if it's okay with me, then it is okay? He said, well, you got me there. But here's the problem, folks. If we're teaching our kids there is no God, then morals, the idea of right and wrong, they had to come from man, right? So, which man gets to decide what is right and what is wrong? You see the problem? Every single one of us in this room, we view certain behaviors to be right and wrong. And yet, if you allow man to take on that position, to say, here's what we think is right, here's what we think is wrong, folks, what direction do you think our morals are going to go? Again, don't have to ask you. In fact, let me just show you what direction they're going to go. 5 weeks ago, the Journal of Medical Ethics, they had an article, peer-reviewed research study, that should have been the front page of Time magazine. And yet it wasn't. And in fact, let me just go ahead and point out to everybody in this room, I honestly did not think I would ever live long enough to see an article published like this one. The article was titled, After Birth Abortion, Why Should the Baby Live? In that particular journal article, here's what the authors state. Abortion is largely accepted, even for reasons that do not have anything to do with the fetus's health. By showing that, number one, both fetuses and newborns do not have the same moral status as actual persons. Number two, the fact that both are potential persons is morally irrelevant. And number three, adoption is not always in the best interest of actual people. The authors argue that what we might call after-birth abortion, that is, killing a newborn, should be permissible in all cases where abortion is, including cases where the newborn is not disabled. Now again, folks, I didn't think I would ever live long enough to see this. And yet, here they are basically saying, you know what? Just because you're human, it doesn't make you special. Here's the way they phrase it. They said, merely being a human is not in and of itself a reason for ascribing someone a right to life. Now, that should not surprise anybody in this room who has sat in a textbook and looked at the fact that we're being told we're just one more evolved creature. And yet, God said we're created in the image and likeness, or we were created in His image and likeness. It doesn't say that about the animals. Now, let's stop for just a moment. Let's put a tent peg down right here. And let's ask the simple question, what does it mean to be created in the image and likeness of God? Does that mean He's got like my hands or my nose or maybe this cute face? Some of you are laughing. No, the Bible says that God is a spirit. Those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth. If that is the case, then what part of Brad is made in the image and likeness of God? It's my spirit. And yet, folks, our kids are being told we don't have a spirit or a soul. In the same article, they go on to say, the alleged right of individuals, such as fetuses and newborns, to develop their potentiality, which someone defends, is overran by the interest of actual people, whether that be parents, family, or society, to pursue their own well-being, because as we have just argued, merely potential people cannot be harmed by not being brought into existence. Actual people's well-being could be threatened by the new, even if healthy child, requiring, notice this, energy, money, and care, which the family might be in short supply of. In other words, you know what, that new infant, it might get in the way of a new boat or a newer car. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to extinguish its life. Even though, again, the Bible talks about how special people are. In Proverbs chapter 6, the Bible says, these 6 things does the Lord hate, yea, 7 are abomination unto Him. And it starts listing those things. It says, a proud look, a lying tongue. Notice what the third one is. Hands that shed innocent blood. Towards the conclusion of this article, the authors say, criteria such as cost, whether it be social, psychological, or economic, For the potential parents are good enough reasons for having an abortion, even when the fetus is healthy, if the moral status of the newborn is the same as that of an infant, and if neither has any moral value by virtue of being a potential person, then the same reasons which justify abortion should also justify the killing of potential persons when it is at the stage of a newborn. Now again, folks, don't be surprised, because when you remove God, how can you teach character? How do you teach values to people? If you notice in classrooms today, I was actually, last week, was talking to a school teacher. She said, Brad, you know, I haven't really thought about it, but you're right. We used to spend time talking about things like honesty and integrity and work ethic. She said, we don't talk about that stuff much anymore. She said, we want our students to not steal, and we don't want them to use drugs, but we can't really say why, what's right and what's wrong, because there is not a standard for right and wrong. So, let me show you a little quote. Benjamin Rush, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, he said, the only foundation for a useful education in a republic is to be laid in religion. Without this, there can be no virtue. And without virtue, there can be no liberty. And liberty is the object in the life of all republican governments. Without religion, I believe learning does much mischief to the morals and the principles of mankind. Folks, I want to show you how we got to where we are. And believe it or not, I don't have to back up too far. You know, if given a history timeline, I don't have to go there. In fact, I'm just going to basically stay within the life of most of you in this room. Now, I could back up. I could actually go all the way back to, say, 1859, Charles Darwin's writing his book, The Origin of Species. That's too far back. Well, we could go to 1925 to Dayton, Tennessee, just up the road, so to speak, to where the Scopes trial took place. But again, realistically, that's too early. What I want us to do is, I want us to go to about 1950, when our government got involved in science. Back up, right here. So, all of a sudden in 1950, the government founded the National Science Foundation. Prior to that, basically you had government over here, you had science over here. Now all of a sudden, the two are coming together. Why would they come together? Those of you who were living in the 1950s, you know why. There was a race going on. Sputnik. The Russians were trying to beat us to space, and in fact, 1957, they did. And all of a sudden, Americans were very nervous. They were afraid, what is going to happen? The Russians will beat us out there. We've got to train up scientists. We've got to redo the way we think science. That was in 1957. We got beat. 2 years later, 1959, the 100th anniversary of Charles Darwin's book, The Origin of Species, President Eisenhower asked Congress for $1 billion. $1 billion. His advisors had told him what we got to do if we're going to keep up. If we're going to keep up, what we've got to do is we've got to revamp the way we look at science. Instead of teaching kids that there is God, we've got to come at it from this evolutionary perspective. The bottom line is his advisors asked for $1 billion to inject evolution into the textbooks. Now folks, $1 billion today, that's a whole lot of money. $1 billion in 1959 was an enormous amount of money. And he got it. And take a look at what happened very soon thereafter. All of a sudden, we've got a domino effect. That was in 1959. 1962, court case, Engel versus Vitale, decides prayer in schools is unconstitutional. The very next year, Madeleine Murray O'Hair won her famous court case. Now, reading the Bible in a school classroom is unconstitutional. Just a short while later, 1968, Arkansas is told you cannot prohibit the teaching of evolution. The very next year, 1969, our nation passes something called the No-Fault Divorce Law, which quite literally has shattered millions of families. I'll talk to the young people for just a minute. Young people, it used to be hard, believe it or not, in the United States of America, it used to be pretty hard to get a divorce. In almost every state, you had to wait a calendar year, and believe it or not, there had to be either proof of adultery or abuse. With this new law, they said, hey, it doesn't matter anymore. Basically, if somebody burns a toast, you can get a divorce. Now, moms and dads, think about this for just a minute. I tell young people, and I'm not kidding, in most states, it is easier to get out of your marriage than it is a cell phone contract. Think about that. A couple of years later, what did we do? We decided that the posting of the Ten Commandments was no longer legal in the classroom. 1980. Now you say, okay, Brad, what does it matter? Folks, it matters because the way we think about our origins determines how we look at things like our purpose in life and eternity, and basically it plays a major role in how we're going to behave. Abraham Lincoln, he once said, the philosophy of the classroom in one generation will be the philosophy of the government in the next. And he's absolutely right. Now, interestingly, those same words, the same thoughts were given by another guy. Now, he tweaked them a little bit, but you might recognize his name. It was Adolf Hitler, who said, let me control the textbooks and I will control the state. So how does this little experiment work for us? What I want to do is I want to show you the results since 1963. And the reason I'm going to use 1963 is kind of my landmark year. Remember, Eisenhower asked for $1 billion in 1959. Normally it takes about 4 years from the time you ask for the money to get it into the textbooks. By 1963, we'd outlawed prayer, we'd outlawed Bible in the classroom. And we'd injected evolution into the classroom. In fact, if you look behind me, you'll notice in just a matter of about 2 years, the amount of evolution in textbooks went up dramatically. So what exactly were the results? And why does it matter to this community? Why are we even hosting a community forum? Take a look. Percentage of teenage girls having premarital sex went up in every age bracket since 1963. Now, I want you, in the next few charts that I show you, to keep your eye on this little orange bar right here. Because prior to that, we were teaching kids that there was a God. And that you were created in His image and His likeness. After this orange bar, we're telling kids, you came from an amoeba. Now, as a symptom of this one, sexually transmitted diseases in kids aged 10 to 14, up 385% since 1963. But that's not even close to all of it. Birth rates for unwed girls, ages 15 to 19, up 200%. Interestingly, pregnancies are up 553% since 1963. Say, wait, time out, Brad, that can't be. How could you have more pregnancies than you have? Well, that would be because just a couple short years later, we passed Roe v. Wade, didn't we? And now a pregnancy doesn't equate to birth, does it? Out of wedlock births, as a percentage of all births, has increased every single year since 1963. And you look at it and you say, yeah, so what, Brad? I mean, we all know of folks who fit that category and maybe are in some tragic situation. Folks, here's why I'm pointing it out. When you break down the family unit, there is a price to pay. And in this situation, here's the price. You take a dad out of the home. Out of all the young ladies who get pregnant as a teenager, 53% come from homes without a dad. 63% of the young people who take their own lives, they come from homes without a father. 71% of high school dropouts come from homes without a dad. 85% of young people in prison, right now as I'm talking to you, they came from homes without a father. So does it matter? Unmarried couples living together is up 725%. since 1963. And you look at me and you say, yeah, Brad, but you know, the population has grown. Absolutely it has. That's why I've got this white bar down here. This is where we should be if we just go by population growth alone. Folks, we don't even blush at this one anymore. Divorce rates up since 1963. Violent crime up 995% since 1963. In fact, take a look. I got a news clipping out of the LA Times. It says that most of the Oakland Unified School District's 92 schools, the fight against crime and violence is unending. An Uzi semi-automatic rifle with 15 hollow-point bullets was among the weapons confiscated by district officials within the last year. Franklin Elementary School. Trying to ensure the students know to hit the ground when bullets fly, they carry out shooting drills twice a year. Shooting drills. Now, folks, I'm a Middle Tennessean. And I can remember fire drills. I remember tornado drills. In fact, I was born kind of at the end of the Cold War era. I can actually remember getting under our desk for bomb drills, like the desk would do anything. I don't remember shooting drills. Suicide up 253% since 1963. In fact, it has gone from the 12th leading cause of death in young people to the 3rd. Again, if you're sitting in this audience, you shouldn't be surprised. Because after all, you take away God, you take away their hope. Child abuse up 2,300% since 1963. By the way, let me point out to everybody in this room, I'm not grabbing numbers out of thin air. Every single one of these has been documented, most of them documented by governmental agencies. Illegal drug use up 6,000% since 1963. Again, shouldn't be surprised. Because after all, if we're telling kids there is no God, there is no punishment reward, why wouldn't we expect them to just eat, drink, and be merry? In fact, this is our real report card right here. We don't want to see it. But the bottom line is, since 1963, the United States has become the world leader in violent crime, divorce rate, teenage pregnancy, illegal drug use, and we've got the highest illiteracy rate of any industrial nation since 1963. Folks, that's not something to be proud of. In fact, let me show you a graph going the other way, and that would be our SAT scores. Interestingly, if you look, starting in the very year that we started teaching this evolutionary origin theory, we had an 18-year straight decline. Oh, you'll notice the two little bumps right here. You say, well, Brad, you know, it looks like we picked it up. Yeah, those are called calibrations. You know what a calibration is? It's where we made the test easier. Because this right here is embarrassing. You see, folks, we've got a big problem. And it's a problem that for whatever reason we're not addressing because we are so pushing this idea that all intelligent people have bought evolution. Well, let me tell you something. Not all intelligent people have. And some intelligent people have looked at it and they realize it is damaging our kids. You want me to show you how it's damaging our kids? Let's go back to, say, 2 years right before 1963. The year 1961, you walk into a school like this one, you walk down the hallway, you open the door, you ask a teacher, what is your greatest problem? What's your biggest complaint? They actually did this survey, and you can find it online. There's their top 7 answers right there. Talking, chewing gum, making noise. That's top 7 problems of teachers in 1961. Now, what if we were to wait till Monday? And we go right over here. First thing we got to realize is we actually got to check in, right? I mean, they don't just let you walk in anymore. And in fact, in some school systems, we got metal detectors. We may have drug dogs walking up and down the hall. But let's say we do get in. We get our visitor badge, we walk into one of the classrooms, and we ask a teacher, what's your biggest complaint? You think chewing gum is going to be at the top of the list? Let me show you what the top of the list is. We got things like assault, robbery, rape, burglary, arson, bombings, murder, suicide. And folks, here's what I don't want you to miss. You take a 15-year-old child from 1961 and a 15-year-old child from today. Anatomically speaking, in the United States of America, they are exactly the same, right? They're both 15-year-old kids. So then what has changed? How do we go from talking and chewing gum being the biggest problem to now we've got rape, robbery, and assault? I'm telling you, it's what we're putting in right up here. You want to talk about why we're having this forum? That's the reason. Because what we're doing is we're taking away their hope. We're taking away everything that is good in their life. Let me break it down for you like this. For those of you who may have a religious training, maybe you're a Christian, maybe you go to church on Sundays. Basically, you look at life like this. There's man at the bottom, you got heaven, that's where we want to get to. How do we get there? The very first step is we've got to acknowledge that we're not supreme, that there's a God. Not only that, we've got to understand that we were created by God and we've got a purpose. We also have to understand that we were made in His image. We've got a soul, and that soul is going to go somewhere. We got to learn that we've got free will. Free will that we can obey, that we can do what He says. So we look in the Bible and we say, okay, we're either going to obey His plan for salvation or we're not. We also realize that Adam sinned, that he was real, that he was separated from God, and because of that separation, we need a Redeemer. And that's Jesus Christ. Last but not least, we understand that in death, the soul goes somewhere. And so we've got these steps that we're thinking about. Well, okay, now let's go back to Carrollton High School. First step, they're being told that there is no God. You say, Brad, that's not true, that's not true. Okay, well then somebody please take out a textbook and show me God in there. Oh, I'm sorry, you can't, because if you did, the SOU would be all over you, wouldn't it? So the first step we've got to get rid of. What about that second step? They're not being told that we're created in the image and likeness of God. They're being told that we came from some ape-like creature, Neanderthal, Lucy, Homo habilis. We've got to get rid of that step as well, don't we? Okay, what about having a soul? Folks, our kids are being told there is nothing supernatural. If you don't believe that, take a look. Scientific method that is being taught from the age of about, 11, 12. Scientific method is taught in all science classes. Basically says this: in order for something to be real, you got to measure it with your 5 senses. You got to be able to touch it, taste it, hear it, smell it, feel it. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. We got to get rid of that one too. When it comes to free will, they would say there's nothing really to obey. So we get rid of that step. As far as Adam, they'd say Adam was a fable. That's a myth. I don't know why you even worry about that Adam guy. That's all mythology. Okay, well, if Adam's not there, then what about the Redeemer? They would further say there is no absolute right and wrong. Finally, they would say death, that's the end. You're done. And so basically what they've done is effectively removed every single one of the steps, and they have cast a major shadow over a promise, over the hope of heaven. In fact, if you've got a Bible with you tonight, I know some of you may, you might flip it open to Psalm 14. Psalm 14, verse 1. Full of sin in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, they have done abominable works. There is none who does good. Who is this verse talking about? We don't like to think of it this way. He's talking about atheists. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, they have done what kind of works? They've done abominable works. So here's what I want us to do for just a moment. I want us to learn a little bit of history tonight and see what happens to a nation that allows itself to turn its back on God. We go back into history to a time where God kept a promise. He told a group of people, I'm going to give you the promised land. Moses did not get to go into that promised land. He turns the command over to a guy named Joshua. Joshua leads them across the Jordan. They set up some memorial stones. He gives them judges. God does. They don't want judges. They want to be like other nations. They want kings. God says, you don't want a king. Because if you have a king, here's what he's going to do. He's going to take the best of your land. He's going to make your children work for him. They don't care. They say, give us a king. So he does. And in succession, he gives them people like Saul, David, Solomon. Here's the guy I want you to remember, Rehoboam. Because it's under Rehoboam that those 12 tribes that had settled into the promised land, they actually split into a divided kingdom. 10 of them went north. They formed what we call Israel. They had 19 kings in succession, every single one of which was evil. In fact, they were so bad that God sent men like Elijah, Elisha, Amos, Hosea. He sent these prophets to call them back. And yet most of you know their fate. 722 BC, they were given over to the Assyrians. God said, I'm done with you. All right, what about the remaining 2 tribes? 2 tribes left, Benjamin and Judah. They formed the nation of Judah. They also had 19 kings, most of which we would call evil. You say, wait a second, Brad, there were some good ones in there. You're right. There were men like Josiah who tried to call them back to the law of the Lord. But interesting, as you're reading through 1st and 2nd Kings, one of the things you keep reading about is they didn't tear down the high places. They let them do whatever they wanted to, worship whatever they wanted. So God sent prophets like Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel to call these people back. And yet again, 606 BC, God said, I'm done with you. And he gave them over to the Babylonians. And you look at me and you say, Brad, why in the world are you bringing up this when we're talking about evolution in Georgia? We'll take a look. It took 213 years for God to give up his chosen people in his chosen land of Israel. It took 349 for Judah. I think the reason they lasted longer is because they did have a few good leaders. But as you look at those dates, here's the one question I want you to ask yourself. How old is the United States of America? I'll give you a hint. We declared our independence in 1776. We fall quite literally right between those 2 dates. Now, folks, listen to me. We better not be too arrogant to think that just because we live in America, God will not bring us to our knees. As you're looking at that right there, the obvious question is, okay, what in the world, what caused God to give up his chosen people? What determines the course of a nation? Well, here's what we can do. Tonight you can turn on the evening news and you can hear about things like healthcare, foreign relations. You can hear about the economy, defense, gun control. Here's a question. If Jesus came back tomorrow, how many of those things matter? None of them. Folks, if you want to know what determines the course of a nation, the Bible tells you it is ultimately how we fear, respect, and honor Jehovah God. And yet we have removed him from our society. I want you to remember 2 kings' names. You can find them in your Bibles. You do a little study on them. The first one is a guy by the name of Ahaz. The text says, walked according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord had cast out from before the children of Israel. There's that word again right there. Abominations. Remember, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Therefore, they have done abominable works. The second king is a guy named Manasseh. You'll find him in 2 Kings 21. Verse 2 goes on to say, Manasseh did evil in the sight of the Lord according to the, there's that word again, abominations of the nations whom the Lord had cast out from before the children of Israel. These guys were committing abominable customs. If you want to know, if you're sitting here tonight, you're wondering, why would God take his chosen people in his chosen land and give them up? The Bible tells you they were committing abominable customs. Now, again, the obvious question is, okay, what were these people doing? Well, there's the short list for you right there. They were committing idolatry. They were committing adultery, homosexuality. They had bad judges, committing immoral practices, using mediums, killing children. Now, as you look at that list, the $64,000 question tonight is, all right, as we look at that, any of those behaviors sound like us today? Because, folks, listen to me. At its root, evolution is a godless belief system. Oh, we can argue back and forth all day long about, oh, no, it's not. That's science. That's the backbone of science. Actually, no, it's not the backbone of science. Science is about collecting data and reporting on it without an evolutionary bias. You say, but that's what everything points to. Interesting, you know, for the first, I don't know, several thousand years, it never pointed there. But all of a sudden, now that we realize teaching evolution will allow people to live any kind of way they want to, morally, now everything is unified on this one thing. Take a look at it. Remember Ahaz? We talked about him just a second ago, one of the kings. The Bible actually peels back the curtain a little bit, and it gives you a little more reasoning of why God did what he did. It says, for the Lord brought Judah low because of Ahaz, king of Israel. Notice this, for he encouraged moral decline in Judah. He encouraged moral decline and had been continually unfaithful to the Lord. Surely in the United States of America, in this area of Georgia, we're not encouraging moral decline, are we? Surely not. I mean, surely we would not provide birth control to first graders in the United States of America. Surely we wouldn't do that, would we? Yeah, we are. Surely we would not have books written to young people that are promoting transgenderism. Surely we wouldn't do that, would we? Yeah, we are. And you look at me and say, glad my child's not 4 years of age yet. I just got an infant. Oh, that's okay. We got books going down as low as 2 teaching them how to be a lesbian. In fact, moms and dads, let me wake you up for just a moment tonight. There have been 9 books sent free of charge to every, listen to me, every public elementary school in the United States of America. These were the first 2. I got 7 of them in my office. I'm going to read you a couple of pages out of Daddy's Roommate. And I need you to understand right up front, I'm not reading the whole book because quite literally it sickens me. But I want you to imagine your child, your grandchild, going down into the library, having library time. The librarian begins to read, my mom and daddy got a divorce last year. Now there's somebody new at daddy's house. Mommy says daddy and Frank are gay. First I didn't know what that meant, so she explained it. Being gay is just one more kind of love. And love is the best kind of happiness. Daddy and his roommate are very happy together. And I'm happy too. Folks, let me tell you what. That right there is wicked. Planting that in the heart and the mind of a child. Lord brought Judah low because he encouraged moral. Surely in the United States of America, we don't have websites that are trying to get married people to commit adultery. Surely we don't have a club for infidelity, right? And surely if we do, we don't have 10 million members to it. Yeah, we do. Folks, we are watching our moral fabric work come undone. And here's the interesting thing. It's not going to happen in 15 or 20 years. It is happening. And you look at me and you say, Brad, how does this have anything to do with this forum? Because again, you take God out of the classroom, there is no standard for right or wrong. You say, but Brad, I mean, doesn't the science prove that we evolved? Okay, scientifically speaking, let's talk about that for a moment. Let me see a show of hands. Anybody in this room, were you taught that maybe everything came from fish and then the fish crawled out on the water, onto the land? Anybody taught that? Okay. I had a young man, college student, really upset with me one weekend. I was doing a seminar. I turned his whole worldview upside down. He came running down the aisle, shaking his finger when it was over. He said, "Well, it could have happened." I said, "Whoa, time out, buddy. What could have happened?" He said, Fish could have crawled out on the land." I smiled at him. I said, "Have you got 2 or 3 minutes?" He said, "Yeah." So let's sit down right here. Let's forget about the textbooks and what the media has told you. Let's do something crazy. Let's think and critically evaluate what that fish would need to live on the land. I said, "I'm going to give you the respiratory system. We're going to say this fish had both gills and lungs. Physiologically impossible, but I said, I'm going to give it to you. What else would have to change in order for this fish to live on the land?" And we began to name things. I said, "You know, one of the first things you got to do is you got to evolve tear ducts, because he's not in water anymore to moisten his eyes. So you got to get lacrimal glands. You got to get that quick. You also got to shed the scales because they dry out. You got to get a moisture barrier, sweat gland. You got to change the immune system because he's in a new environment." And we started rattling off all this stuff. Digestive system. What was funny is after like 4 or 5 minutes, he started throwing things in there too. And then I stopped him. I said, "Buddy, do you realize you still haven't named the #1 problem? You haven't named the biggest hurdle that fish has." And he looked at me, big eyes, he was concerned. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You haven't." So you got a major hurdle. He said, "What is it?" I said, "That fish has got to convince his girlfriend to go with him." Because one's not enough. Now, while we're on that girlfriend, somebody in this room will tell me, how do we evolve a separate male and female? All the while still being able to reproduce that species. What good is a partially evolved womb? Not really any good to you, is it? Now, while you're thinking about that, let's think about this. What about blood clotting? You know, we don't think about it a whole lot because, you know, we scratch our hand, we put some pressure on it and we stop bleeding, right? Our body is incredible. It's, as I would say, it's intelligently designed. It's got things like platelets, prothrombin, vitamin K that actually will help us to clot blood, but it's not just about clotting blood, folks. Your body has to also stop clotting blood, because if you just, all you're doing is building one massive clot, eventually you're going to have a stroke and die. That's not a good thing. So how many early creatures died bleeding out as we were evolving all the properties we needed to be able to clot blood? And not just be able to clot blood, to be able to stop the process. Or how about this one? For about an hour I've been talking to you. Could somebody please explain to me why human beings are the only creatures with the ability to build on knowledge and communicate the way we do? Because here's the funny thing. I sat in a general biology class for 2 weeks listening to a man tell me how we had climbed down out of the trees, learned to walk upright, all because our food source was drying up. Well, folks, listen, I know a little bit about anatomy. And I can promise you, everything needed to walk uprightly has a whole lot more change than it would be just having some vocal cords, vocal folds. So if we can evolve all of this, why can't they evolve this? Because I promise you, this is a whole lot bigger deal in getting food than this is. You say, well, Brad, there are animals out there that can communicate, they can talk. Okay, your parent, he mimics, okay, let's be honest. And can they communicate? Yeah. Can they build on knowledge? And by that I mean, you take a bird, right? He builds a nest. Does his offspring look at that nest and go, you know, I think we really need an awning, because it rains. And so they build an awning, and the next generation says, you know, we're in southern Georgia, I'd like central heat and air. And the next generation says, I've got to like satellite TV. No, they just keep building gas, don't they? About 10 years ago, I bought a Volvo sedan. I traveled about 42 weekends a year. And I wanted a car that was safe. And I'll never forget, when I bought the car, the guy probably spent at least, and I'm not exaggerating, he spent at least 15 minutes just detailing the safety features. I mean, at this time, 10 years ago, this car had things that even today a lot of cars still don't have. Brake lights would get brighter when it was raining so that you could see them. He spent all this time telling me, had all these canopies. He said, basically, Brad, if you ever roll this car, you will be enveloped in this airbag canopy. I told my wife, I said, I want to flip it just to see the canopy. Question. Henry Ford, do you think he ever envisioned an airbag? Or a GPS? Or a DVD player in an automobile? Human beings can build on knowledge. Animals can't. Somebody tell me how we evolved that ability. Oh, what about consciousness? We are all self-aware. How do we evolve that? Or what about love, art? Why do we participate in those? If everything is about survival of the fittest, in fact, why do people in this room give time, money, energy to individuals you may never see? Charity, if it's all about survival of the fittest. And furthermore, could somebody please tell me where that first living cell came from? Because I've been asking that question in about every state of the union. And folks, let me tell you what, we don't have an answer. I had one guy, he was just adamant, oh, it could have. Now, under the right conditions, you got lightning and this primordial soup, it could have come together. That's okay. Now, think about what you're telling me and what you teach your students. He said, what do you mean? I said, you teach your students. The second law of thermodynamics says everything is going towards disorder, towards chaos. Over time, things are supposed to go towards chaos. You don't believe me? Leave your car parked in your front yard for 50 years, see what happens. Okay? Everything goes towards a disordered state. So why in the world would all the parts of a cell come together? Why would you have organelles and a bilipid membrane coming together? He smiled at me and said, well, you know, given enough time, it could have happened. I said, okay, then maybe you can answer my second question. What did that cell eat? He looked at me, I kid you not, he just got, you know how sometimes people just kind of blink and go, it's like you hit a TV screen and it blacks it. He looked at me and goes, I never thought about that. I said, no, you probably haven't, but I bet that cell was wondering. Folks, listen to me, there are so many questions that this theory cannot answer. And yet we're teaching it as a fact. Why not do something really radical? Why not actually examine the evidence, lay it all out in front of our kids and say, hey, you know what? You make an informed choice. You critically evaluate all of the evidence, all the theories of origins that are out there. Maybe we came from aliens. Maybe we came from pond sludge, or maybe we came from God. You look at it and you discern for yourself which one makes sense. You know why we can't do that? Because most of our kids would look at the evidence and say, there's God. There has to be a God because things are far too complex. And if our kids settle on that answer, that means the people teaching them can't live immoral lives. Oh, they can. But they're not going to have an army to join them. And folks, right now what they're doing is they're recruiting our kids to be their army. Darkness doesn't like the light. So, here's what we're seeing. Our moral fabric work basically deteriorated over time. And the sad part to me is probably everybody in this room, if I were to give you a test tonight, we've all bought into it, and we don't even think about it sometimes. If I were to have a quiz saying, have you been evolutionized? Let me just real quick show you what I mean. Let's say that it's 9:45, you get home tonight, your grandchild comes running up to you. They want granddad to read them a book. So they go over, they get one of those big old picture books, they crawl up in your lap, you find that nice soft spot in the couch, you lean back, you take the book. Let me ask you, do you actually read them the book? Or did you actually realize the very first word of that book says prehistoric? Some of you didn't even catch it, did you? You know why? Because we've been evolutionized. Prehistoric, what's that mean? That means a time before man. Now, here's an interesting little exercise. If we were to open a dictionary, 1766, ask the question, where's the word prehistoric? Guess what? It's not there. You know why? Because they didn't believe there was a long period of time before man. We go to 1860, Webster, one of his early dictionaries, we ask the question, where's the word prehistoric? It's not there. Why? Because it's only been within the last 75 years that we have drank the Kool-Aid and embraced this idea that everything is millions and billions of years old. So, as you're thinking about that, ask yourself, what worldview do your children possess right now? We said there's really only two. Which worldview are they embracing? I want to give you 6 Bible verses, and I realize some of you came here tonight, you didn't necessarily want to hear any Bible, and I appreciate that. I hope you'll appreciate for just a moment me giving out 6 Bible verses that I believe will teach a biblical worldview, and also goes a long way in teaching somebody the age of the earth. If you're a mom, a dad, a grandparent, let me encourage you to write these 6 Bible verses down. Basically, in asking questions like, how old is the earth? Where did man come from? Most Christians understand what we do is we start with the Bible, and then we look at the world. Because ultimately, what we see in the world is going to agree with what we read in the Bible. 6 Bible verses. Take a look. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. For those of you in this room who wear the label of Christian, if you can't trust the first verse of the Bible, why would you trust anything else? If it's not accurate. You say, okay, Brad, I hear what you're saying and all, but exactly when was the beginning? It just says, in the beginning. All right, let's keep reading. Colossians chapter 1, verse 16. For by him were all things created that are in heaven, that are in the earth. Paul here telling us it is a creation event, and that God created everything in heaven and in earth. Verse number 3. Matthew chapter 19, verse 4. He answered, he said unto them, have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? This is Jesus speaking. And he's telling us there were males and females here. Notice what he said, at the beginning. In fact, look at how he phrases it in Mark chapter 10, verse 6. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Okay, we've got a problem. Because if I go over here and grab a science book out of high school, it is teaching my kid that this earth is 4.6 billion years old. And that man's only been here for 3 billion. And yet Jesus is saying that from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Folks, both can't be right. Next verse, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 45. So it is written, the first man, Adam, was made a living soul. The last Adam was made a quickening spirit. Who's the first Adam he's talking about there? Adam of Adam and Eve. Who's the second Adam? That's Jesus Christ, folks. You dismiss that first Adam as a myth or fable. What are you doing to the second one? The last verse I will give you is Genesis chapter 3, verse 20. Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. Letting us know all the lineage of humanity is coming through this lady named Eve. Now, with those 6 Bible verses in hand, here's what you can do. You can take a friend, a co-worker, a child, a grandchild, you can sit them down, open your Bible in Genesis chapter 5. Now, if I'm going to do it, the way I do it is actually build a timeline. Open your Bible in Genesis 5 and you read, Adam lived 130 years and he got a son. He called his name Seth. So you drop 130 on your timeline. And you keep reading. Seth lived 105 years. He begot Enosh. We add 105 to it. We're up to 235 and we keep reading. Enosh lived 90 years. He begat Canaan. We add 90 to that. We're up to 325. And suddenly, folks, what you can actually do is you can build a timeline that is actually telling you the age of the earth. You say, well, time out. How did you make that jump? Because in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It was a creation event. Males and females here from the beginning. First male's name, I'm just giving you his lineage. You say, but oh man, there's all kind of holes and gaps in the genealogies. Okay, when you get home tonight, take a look at Jude. New Testament book. I would say turn to Jude chapter 3, but I don't want to mess with your mind too much. There's only one chapter. Look at verse 14 where it speaks of a guy named Enoch being the seventh of Adam. You turn back here, and lo and behold, there's Enoch, and guess what? He's seventh. So if you're going to put gaps or holes in it, it's got to come after this guy right here. And folks, I promise you there's not enough gaps or holes in the world to fit evolutionary time into this thing. Now, as you're looking at it, take a look at this. Some of you never thought about this. The vertical line that I just dropped on the screen, you realize everybody to the left of that could have had a face-to-face conversation with Adam? Because they were living as contemporaries. You're talking about Noah's dad, Lamech, could have looked at him in the face and said, what was it like? But to me, the one that's even more impressive, take a look at this. Here you got Noah, his son Shem, so the timeline continues on. Everybody to the left of that arrow could have had a face-to-face conversation with Noah's son Shem about what it was like in the pre-flood world. You're now talking about men like Abraham and Isaac could have looked him in the face and said, what was it like? So folks, think about this for just a moment. According to what the Bible gives us, it is roughly, in round numbers, 2,000 years from Adam to a guy named Abraham. It is also, in round numbers, roughly 2,000 years from Christ to us today. We're living in the year 2012 AD. You know what AD stands for? It's Latin for in the year of our Lord. I realize in the school system they're learning CE, Common Era, and BCE, before Common Era. Folks, I don't care what labels you put on it, what initials you put after it, you still have to hinge it around a zero date that goes by who? Jesus. So for all you Christians in the room, when you get upset with an atheist, you think about that tonight. All right, so stay with me for just a minute. Adam to Abraham, 2,000 years. Jesus to us, roughly 2,000 years. If we could bridge the middle, if you could get from Abraham to Christ, you would know within roughly 6 days about how old the earth is. Well, wouldn't it be nice if this timeline continued on and went all the way to Christ? And it does. In fact, you don't just get one lineage, you've got Mary and Joseph's. Now, here's the fun thing. Tonight I'm looking every single one of you in the face and saying, according to the Bible, the age of the earth is pretty young. It's less than 10,000 years old. The fun job tomorrow is showing you the science of that. Because right now some of you are looking at that going, there is no way. Man, there's no way the dinosaurs, no, those rocks, man. Have you seen the rocks? Look how old they are. Okay, stop right there. What does a young rock look like? Not like they come out with diapers on, okay? My oldest son and I, we had the pleasure of going up to Mount St. Helens on the 30th anniversary of that volcanic eruption. Now, I want you to think about this. He and I saw rocks that are younger than some of you in this room. They were made 30 years ago. There's some of you in this room that are older than 30 years old. So I know for sure I've got one in my house of a rock that is younger than some of you. So don't just sit there and say, well, they look so old. Tomorrow my job is going to be sharing with you scientifically how we know this thing fits what we just talked about. It's not that big of a deal. It's not that big of a transition. Before I open it up for your questions tonight, I do want to leave you with one quote that we've already touched on. Because to me, this is at the crux of everything. Adolf Hitler said, let me control the textbooks and I will control the state. Folks, our nation is at a very, very dire situation right now. We can continue to basically stick our head in the sand and act like everything's okay. And we can continue to allow our children to be indoctrinated, to run off to Babylon, so to speak. Or we can take them back. And we can say, you know what? That's not good science. Not only is that not good science, that is a religion, that's a belief system. You say, well, why are you calling it a belief system? Take a look. The year 2005, Federal Court of Wisconsin ruled that atheism is a form of religion. Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals observed atheism is the inmate's religion. The group that he wanted to start was religious in nature, even though it expressly rejects the belief in the supreme being. Okay, now get that for just a moment. So the court has ruled atheism is a religion, even though we hear the separation of church and state. What is the one religion we're giving a free pass to in the classroom? Atheism. Humanism. Moms and dads, you've heard humanism before. Humanism is the backbone for textbooks today. If you don't believe me, we can talk about that. Humanist Manifesto, basically, if I were to show you a couple of basic planks out of it, the very first plank of the Humanist Manifesto says religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing, not created. So here's Brad's summary of that. Basically, there is no God. Plank number 2 says, humanism believes that man is a part of nature and that he has emerged as a result of a continuous process. Translation, we're the product of evolution. Plank number 3 says, holding an organic view of life, humanists find the traditional dualism of mind and body must be rejected. Mind and body dualism? Yeah, that's the idea that we have a soul and a brain, that they're different. Number 4, humanism recognizes man's religious culture and civilization, as clearly depicted by anthropology and history, are the product of a gradual development due to his interaction with nature, or natural environment, and with his social heritage. Bottom line is religion is a product of evolution, according to them. The 8th plank goes on to say, religious humanism considers the complete realization of human personality to be the end of man's life and to seek its development and fulfillment in the here and now. Eat, drink, and be merry. Because there is no God. You're the product of evolution. You don't have a soul. And religion, that's just a product of evolution. And this is the core of our kids' curriculum. And if you're sitting there looking at me right now thinking, it's okay because I'm going to watch what's in my child's science books, let me just point out to you, it's not just in science books, moms and dads. It's in history books. I had a young lady in Jacksonville, Alabama. She came up to me. She said, Dr. Harrub, there's evolution in my home economics book. I thought she was kidding. I said, could you bring it to me? She did. Sure enough, first page, first chapter of a home ec book starts out talking about the evolution of man. On a book on how to make biscuits, folks. It's in math books. I didn't like math much in school. Got through calculus, that's all I had to have for medical school, I'm done. But the problems I hated the most, you guys remember word problems? Oh, I hated word problems. Remember those 2 trains leaving the station? I wanted to blow up those trains. You realize in many textbooks those trains have been replaced. And now our kids are reading word problems that say, Lucy lived so many millions of years ago, Neanderthal man lived so many millions of years ago, at what point would their lineage cross? So our kids are getting it from every single angle. Moms and dads, it does matter what your kids believe about why they're here. It matters what they believe about where they came from. And it matters what they believe about where they're going to go when they die. You got one of two choices. You can let them continue down a path and let other people indoctrinate them into a godless theory, or we can take our kids back and teach them the truth. This weekend, we're going to learn the truth. We're going to look at the evidence. I did a radio interview with a gentleman by the name of Steve, and I told him, I said, one of the things I hope will happen is the community will come and look at some evidence. When did the dinosaurs exist? What about fossil man? Find out. You're going to have to be back tomorrow at 7. Right now, I'm going to stop because I've been talking for about an hour and a half, and I'm going to open it up for your questions, your comments, let you talk a little bit. The way I'm going to do it, normally, if you raise your hand, say your question, we'll try that. I'll go ahead and tell you I've got a bright light in my face right here, so I may not see it. I've got some spotters in the back to help me. If I can't hear you, they're going to help me just repeat your question so that everybody can hear. The floor is yours. Comments, questions. If you need to just vent your spleen, this is a great time to do it. Yes, sir. Absolutely, we're laughed at. Let me throw out a couple of things. His question basically is that he's got grown children, but he's got grandchildren. How do we do anything? How do we change when the majority of the intelligent academic community is saying, hey, this is it. You know, if we don't do this, then we're ignorant, we're stupid, we're foolish. Let me start with what I consider to be the biggest weapon we've got. There is one language that everybody speaks, and that is this right here. Money. Our children represent money to the school system. I'm going to throw something out at you that may be a surprise to some of you. It may sound really radical. I live in the Nashville, Tennessee area. Every single year, the Southern Baptists and all over the world come together for their annual convention for that particular denomination. About 2 years ago, somebody put forth a proposal for all of the Southern Baptists to pull every one of their kids. That's a 7-year exit strategy. And in their exit strategy, they have taken into account single mothers, disabled children, the whole 9 yards, to pull every one of their kids out of public schools and put them into private schools, church schools, or home schools. And you think about financially what message that's going to send if they do that. Folks, that's huge. That's one possibility. Number two, we need Christian educators. We need people serving on the front line. I don't know how many of you here are teachers, Christian teachers. Let me thank you because you know you're serving on the front line, aren't you? Number three, we need Christians on the school board. Because ultimately, who owns the school? We do. We need Christians on the textbook committees. Again, we don't have that. I actually was talking to Bob Staples in the back. Where are you, Bob? He's over here. He gave me a card. Christians for Science. Got a website on the back of it. We were talking about how they are trying to basically unify, or well, they're trying to standardize all of the curriculum all across all 50 states. Right now, they're in the process of trying to do that for science. And would you believe that they're wanting to use evolution as kind of the core backbone of the science curriculum? And what he is trying to do is trying to unite people like us, get people together, because they're going to have 2 public hearings. And they're going to allow us to speak up and say, hey, we don't want that. So we got to speak up. I think, the bottom line is we've been quiet too long, folks. We have stuck our head in the sand, and we woke up, and all of a sudden we look around and we see this nasty, three-headed creature, and we're thinking, what can we do? What should we do? What we have to do is we have to realize our kids are more valuable than all that mess going on. We got to do something. We got to act. How do we do it? For you personally, in this area, you're not in metropolitan Atlanta, so it may not be as bad yet. It will get there. I can promise you that. It was funny, I was in a small town, Missouri, not long ago. I'd been there before. I went to speak about 2 or 3 years ago. They told me when I was there the first time, they said, oh man, our school's not bad. We didn't talk about God, we pray, we love. I went back to do another seminar, and guess what? They'd had a single atheist move into their community who went home and told his dad. Dad started suing the school system. School system sent out letters to all the teachers saying, you know what we used to do? We're not doing that anymore. One person affected an entire community. Well, let me ask you, if one person can do that, why can't 200, 300, 400 people do something good? Good question.
We have a lot, Mike, for the next question.
All right. Other comments, questions, thoughts?
I am a public school teacher, and I'm also a Christian, and I want to add to that list of things people can do, because I personally know that the power of prayer is extremely strong and valuable.
Absolutely.
And as an educator and a Christian, I'm going to ask very much for you guys to pray for all the Christian teachers in our public schools. It's a daily struggle. And I love my kids, I love my students, and I want to do the best thing for them. And I, on behalf of all the Christian educators, I ask for your prayers.
Absolutely.
Well, I don't know how you go behind that. Are you familiar with the state of Georgia is about to go through some sort of charter school legislation? And from what I've understood, we're going to be able to use tax money to go off with charter schools. Is this something that we can implement?
Absolutely, but I'll go ahead and warn you up front, in most of the states that have tried that, a lot of times the NEA unions will try to shut them down within the first 2 or 3 years. Even, I mean, the prime example is D.C. D.C., they did exactly what you're talking about. They set up charter schools. It was doing great things. Within 2 years, they had turned some of these kids' lives completely around, changed the way they looked at learning, and because it was not beneficial to the teachers' union, they shut it down and farmed the kids back out to the regular schools and basically undid all the good that they had already done. Would I go for it? Absolutely. If it means getting more control in the classroom, you know, having more control over who is teaching my child, absolutely.
I've kind of given up on changing the public school in that we were fighting this when I was in school. And so what happens to all those kids and all, that's been a couple of years. What happens to all these kids while we're trying to change it when it's still going on? And I'd piggyback onto what he said. We don't have the strong unions here they have in D.C., some of the northern places. If the money follows the child, that means I get to choose where my child or, you know, my grandson or whatever, where he goes to school, and that's going to say something to him. When we do have that option. So I will be voting for that referendum, and half my family works in the public school system. It's not an anti-public school thing. I'm a substitute teacher.
Yeah.
I tell the kids, you know, isn't it great how God made you?
Is this a voucher type system? Is that?
It's a referendum where the citizens of Georgia.
It's a referendum where the citizens of Georgia get to choose if the state can set up charter schools, even if they're denied by the local school board.
Oh.
Because think about it, the local school board, if they feel it all threatened, That's like going to Publix and saying, we have to have your permission in order to open
Another
Food Line.
Yep.
We want you, they're not gonna want, because they see it as competition.
So basically, you're busting up a monopoly.
Right.
Okay, all right. Other comments, thoughts, questions? Over here. We're going to let Bill Donahue run it across. That's better than saying man or wife.
Need a boom mic.
Do what?
Need a boom mic.
A boom, yes, yes.
First of all, I just want to thank you for standing up for truth and right. I just really appreciate being here and knowing that there's other people that feel the same way I do about these things. I thought it was interesting in our local paper, the Times-Georgian, that just today, I don't know if you saw it, but there's a lady who's published a book for children. And it talks about, she says in the book that she says what they're being taught in the schools, but this is God's way. And there's an email, you can buy it. I just think, we all should support her and buy the book for our children or grandchildren. There are other people out here that are saying, this is wrong what they're teaching in the schools, and that there's other ways, and we need, we can only do so much in the schools, but in our homes and our families, we can do a lot.
Back to the room back there.
I called a lady today who had written that book for the children and told her about our program tonight. Her name is Williamson. I don't remember her first name.
Rebecca.
She said she would, Rebecca Williamson. And she said that she was just thrilled to hear that something like this was going on, and she tried to be here tonight. I don't know if she is or not because I haven't met her yet. But I think we ought to encourage her and see if
Absolutely.
we can get together with her.
You mentioned something about, in your description of humanism, that they believe that religion is a result of evolution.
Right.
I've actually witnessed a debate or two where an atheist proclaimed that belief. My question is, if religion is a product of evolution, and they're teaching evolution in school, should it not therefore be a part of the curriculum?
In other words, can't have it both ways. Yeah, I mean, and that's what I was saying too with the whole atheism thing. If atheism has been declared a religion, then we can't teach an atheistic belief system either. If you won't let Judeo-Christianity in the classroom, then we also got to do the same thing to atheism and all of its tenets, and evolution is one of its tenets. I like the way you guys are pulling it back and forth.
I just want to kind of piggyback on what was just said, and I think at times they do try to teach some religion, but it's never Christianity.
Right.
I remember in high school, I think it was a world cultures class or something like that. I forget what it was. Some kind of history class. And we spent weeks on Islam, weeks on Buddhism, learning the different tenets and all the different things about these religions. And in the book that we were using, there was literally 3 paragraphs about Jesus, and that was it. And I think that's part of it. They maybe do try to stick religion in there, but it's never Christianity. It's always all these other world religions, and saying, they try to use that to show, well, yeah, it is they claim it is a product of evolution. That's why we've got so many different ones, and they use that against us.
Yeah, great point. I mean, when you think about the fact that they're putting surahs out of the Quran in our literature books, kids' literature books, can you imagine the uprising that would happen if we tried to put Bible verses, which, by the way, used to be in the textbooks? He's right. They're teaching Islam, they're teaching Buddhism. for all the older folks in this room, had I told you 50 years ago, here's what we aim to do. We aim to teach your kids tolerance with homosexuality. We want them to basically doubt Judeo-Christianity and embrace other world religions. We want them to think that cohabitation is good and acceptable. We want, you know, listed a list of these things. You would have thought 50 years ago I was insane, there was no way it was going to happen. 1958, they put together a list of everything that they wanted to accomplish in order to help promote things like communism and socialism in the United States of America. Guess what, folks? They've been checking them off. And here we are. Right here.
I just wanted to add to the list of things that can be done, because I think the things that were already mentioned are so very important, but I think also, and you'll be doing this tomorrow night, but we need to educate ourselves scientifically. I mean, if you want to teach someone the gospel, you have to know a little bit about the Bible to do so. If you want to talk about evolution and creation and speak with someone who already thinks you're crazy, you need to be able to, you know, understand the terminology and things like that. You know, what's the difference between macroevolution and microevolution? And what about interstrative fossils? I mean, things like that. We need to know these things, because when someone throws these terms at us and these phenomena at us, we need to be able to say, I know what you're talking about, and let me tell you what's wrong with that, why that's flawed.
Exactly.
Because there are so many people who sincerely go through life, they just don't care, they're apathetic, and if you can just present a little bit of fact to them, you can blow the doors open to get them to care.
Yep.
And then also combat the people that already actively think that you're a nut job. You can at least speak intelligently with them and start to change their perception.
Absolutely. Great point. Moms and dads, I would add something to that too. In the last 20 years, our culture has been very, very effective at pulling teenagers away from their parents. We've got all kinds of activities, we've got all kinds of things, some of which you may look at and say, okay, that's good, that may be healthy. But a lot of what it is doing, it is breeding a rebellion and a contempt between teens and their parents. It's so common that today we expect our kids to be rebellious when they're teens. By the way, that hasn't always been the case. You say, okay, Brad, why does that matter? It matters because at a time when they need to be looking to their parents, they're viewing their parents as ignorant and stupid, and they run off to college, and they see a guy in a white starched lab coat who fills their brain with all kinds of anti-God sentiment. And they're thinking, you know, Mom and Dad don't know anything, I want to listen to this smart guy. So one of the things we've actually got to do is we've got to change the paradigm with our kids. We've got to show our kids, you know what, it's all right to like Mom and Dad, hang out with Mom and Dad, and to do things, and you know what, we may not be as dumb as you think.
First, I just want to point out that there's a stark difference in the fall of Israel and Judah in the United States. Those were nation states established by God.
Absolutely.
And the United States is not.
Absolutely.
The fall of the United States is completely, in some ways, not completely, but very different. We're not an established religious nation state. The church is the new Israel. So I think that parallel is a little off, but anyway. You know, the church, or God, has been under assault like this before, in a very hostile government, a government that did not believe.
First and second century.
Exactly. And the way we grew during that time was not that this is anything wrong with this. I agree with this. But this cannot be our focus. Our focus is converting people, their hearts and minds, to Jesus Christ. And when we do that first, this is a natural byproduct. Doesn't mean we can't stand up. It doesn't mean we shouldn't stand up.
But we can't let Satan completely change our focus to meeting these type of arguments, whereas we've had an example of how this works in the first century, the way Jesus combated the Roman government, the way that Christianity combated the Roman government. And that is going, teaching, ministering. And I think that's got to be our number one priority. This is fine.
And I totally agree with you. But here's the difference and here's the problem. If we're going to teach people about Jesus Christ, we've got to start at home. Back then, kids were at home. They were with their parents. They were taught by their parents. They were mentored by their parents. Today, we foolishly let strangers train up our kids. That's not the same. So if we're going to spread the gospel and teach the truth, the very first place we've got to start is in the home. Because folks, we're not even converting our kids. We may convert them for about 4 years. And then they run off to school. And they're gone. So, while I totally agree, the way we're going to change this is one by one relationship, teaching people the truth. Amen. But in far too many places, we don't realize there's a mission field that's in our house. And that mission field, in too many cases, is lost, is gone. I'll be honest with you guys. I think it is very dangerous and very foolish to allow a child who you want to be a servant of God to go sit at the feet of somebody who you know may be teaching them something that is anti-God. I'm not sure why we do that. I don't understand why we would want somebody who is, quote, a Babylonian teaching our little Hebrew child. I think if it's important for us to get our children to heaven and others, then what we got to do is we got to make sure they are instilled with the truth. Yes, sir.
A quick comment. Either we are a religious culture or we are like the pagan culture. In other words, in the book of Acts, Peter spoke to a religious audience, and they were familiar with religious language, and they were able to preach Jesus to that audience. I appreciate the comment that a previous gentleman said about the emphasis on Jesus, and that is true. But one of the best examples of preaching Jesus is the Apostle Paul. And when the Apostle Paul in Acts chapter 17 was talking to an audience that did not have the background, did not know the language, matter of fact, they were steeped in various philosophical views. The text says the Epicureans and the Stoics were there. If we go back and we study the book of Acts, we'll see that the Apostle Paul, the first thing that he did is he countered their worldview. And when he was able to counter their worldview, he was able to show that Jesus the Christ is the way to know about God, the way for salvation, and he did make the case for Christ. And the same thing is true for us today. We must be aware of the battle of the minds of the people in our country. We used to be like the Jews in Acts chapter 2, but we are no longer like the Jews in Acts chapter 2. So there is value in discussing these things and bringing these things to our light, because we must do like the Apostle Paul did. He confronted the worldview of its time. And my friends, I believe the worldview of our time is human, secular atheism, or philosophical naturalism. And things like this may help us, but certainly we need to study more and be more up on that topic. Thank you.
In Acts 17, remember they had the idol to the unknown gods, and that's where he had to start. Was, okay, let's decide, was there a God? And if so, is it one true living God?
I'm usually really shy and I don't like to speak, but I feel led by God. My story is a little more of a testimony. I was brought up in Church of Christ and with my parents, and I went to public school in the early 90s. And in 5th grade, at the young age of 10, I was taught atheism and the Big Boom theory by by one of my teachers who I highly respected. And for over 15 years, I went into a dark phase, a very, very dark atheist phase. And I thought I was lost, and it was very scary, and I completely lost all my footing that I was brought up in. And not until I was in college and had my first child that I came back to the light. But as a child that is brought up in this very thing, and it's gotten worse. I'm also a substitute teacher, and even at this school, I was asked to do one of the science classes that was teaching a little bit of the evolution, and I refused. I would absolutely never want a child to go through that, whether they're brought up in Christianity or not, to go through that doubt and that scary period that I went to. And so I got fired for that, but that was okay with me as long as it was not coming from my mouth, and I went and made a complaint about it and got a lot of support with it. But I just want to wanted to share that it is very scary for children to feel that there's nothing. For you to come up and your parents bring you up in Christianity, and then everything, and the people who you respect, the teachers that are with you every day, and they completely strip that away and tell you that it's false and that your parents don't know what you're talking about. That is scary. And I am just thankful to God that I came back to it. A lot of my best friends never came back from it, and I still try to witness to them to this day, every day when they have problems, and I just know that I wouldn't have the problems that I had I not gone through that dark phase. So this is something that needs to be changed. It's scary, and they're still doing it to our children right now without even letting the adults know, their parents know. My parents had no clue. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you sharing that more than you know. That's, it doesn't get any more blunt than that right there. How many of our kids are attending church services on Sunday, but spiritually they're already gone? And I'm actually going to ask you, if you don't mind, you think about a 14-year-old who's sitting in your church on Sunday morning, the church building on Sunday morning, but they're already mentally and spiritually gone. Were there ever times where you had already kind of mentally left, but you were in the building? There you go. How many people in your building this coming Sunday physically are going to be there, but they've already checked out? They don't believe. They're full of doubt, skepticism. One or two more, and then we're gonna actually shut down for the night. I do want you to come back tomorrow night. We'll open it up again for questions. Yes, sir.
Brad, just real quick, piggybacking on something you said earlier about when all this began was when evolution began to be taught in school. But don't you think too that at around that same time we had the space race, and you touched on that all of a sudden we began to believe in all of these scientists that, oh wow, we can put a man on the moon.
Yeah.
And so now they become the authoritarian, and we teach our children to respect the authority and never to challenge it. And but we need to be able to teach our children to respectfully challenge our children to their teachers in the classroom.
Yeah, we put, I mean, without a doubt, we put scientists and others on a pillar that really ought to be reserved for God. And unfortunately, our kids are looking up to those. I don't have a problem at all with young people looking up to educated people, as long as those educated people are themselves looking up to their superior. And the problem is, in too many cases, they're not. Folks, listen to me. You don't get a whole lot more arrogant than a neurosurgeon. I was in the neurology department, medical school, UT, and those people, they thought that God was like their slave, their servant. They thought they were bigger than God. And when you've got an ego and an arrogance about you like that, and they are responsible for teaching young people, that gets very scary. One more, then I'll let you guys out of here. Who gets the last comment, question tonight? Right over here. All right, I like that. Yes, sir.
I believe that's even a lot of the community, the way can be serious. ACLU has an agenda. They'll come in,
Yes, they do.
they'll one little threat, a little lawsuit, and the whole system changes.
Yes.
And I believe we're gonna have to attack that, or look at doing that, and plus, to add insult to misery, we pay for it.
Yes, we do.
With taxpayer dollars.
Yes, we do.
And the ACLU is some coke behind all this.
Okay, and I wanna, that's a great thing to end on, because I wanna point out something that some of you have never thought about. The ACLU is adamant that we must teach this evolutionary theory in the classrooms, and if we try to teach God, then they get all mad and they try to sue. Anybody in this room ever realize evolution is teaching people racism? And I'll prove it to you. Our kids are learning that man came out of Africa. Okay, I've got textbooks, I can show you all the little pictures. We came out of, for instance, the Afar region of Africa. You look at early man, lots of hair, dark skin, we got all kind of names. Homo habilis, Neanderthal man, Homo erectus, all these different critters, Lucy. So we start shedding the hair, and lo and behold, a couple 100,000 years later, we got white guys walking out of Europe. And folks, I don't care how you cut it. That is teaching that white people are further evolved than dark-skinned people. That's racism. That is teaching that white people, and in fact, Charles Darwin actually in his writings, we certainly wouldn't put this in the textbook, but he put in the textbook, in his writings, the second book he wrote, The Descent of Man, that, quote, the Negro people were closer to the apes than white people. And yet the ACLU is adamant that we teach evolution to our kids. Folks, the real story is there's only one race, that's the human race, and God created us all in His image and His likeness. Thank you for that comment. Tomorrow evening, we are going to be back right here at 7 o'clock. I want you to do a couple things for me. Number one, plan on being here. Number two, bring somebody with you. And in the next 24 hours, call somebody, text somebody, email somebody. Bring them with you, because I think hopefully tonight you've seen that this stuff really is important. What we're going to do is we're going to peel back the curtain. We're going to look at some evidence. If you've got kids, grandkids, please make sure they are with you. I promise you, it is worth them missing a soccer game or a basketball game to be here to see this information tomorrow. Appreciate very, very much your attention. See you tomorrow night.